Hi, and welcome to Wealth Stories for Sleep. Here, the idea is simple. While you sleep, you grow richer. We gently send messages of abundance straight into your subconscious through calm stories made to gently guide you to sleep.
And while you settle in, this space already helps you feel a little lighter. Tap the like button and follow this channel. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It's always heartwarming to see this quiet circle forming people from so many places, falling asleep to the same voice, connected by something made to slow us down. You are not alone here. You're part of this quiet little family. And I'm so glad you're here. And as you listen, just remember, these stories weren't created just to help you fall asleep. They speak gently to your subconscious, planting words of wealth, possibility, and quiet prosperity. Come with me. The bridge that only appeared when someone believed. No one knew when the river had changed. Maybe it had always been like that, wide, deep, silent. But something had shifted in the air, as if a bridge had once existed there, but disappeared when people stopped believing it was possible to cross. Those who lived near the edge spoke softly about it. They said there had been a time when people crossed with ease, without fear, just with the certainty that they would reach the other side. There was no construction, no stone, no rope. Only faith, pure, invisible, but firm. And then, one day, doubt arrived. It didn't come loudly. It whispered things like, what if the bridge fails? What if it never existed? What if you fall? One by one, people stopped trying. They sat by the edge, created other paths, built rafts that didn't float well, and pretended to forget that once they had walked over the air, because they believed. In one of the small cottages near the riverbank lived a boy named Lucien. He was quiet, with a gaze that always sought something more. He didn't understand why everyone had given up crossing. He had grown up listening to the stories from his grandmother, who swore she had crossed the invisible bridge barefoot when she was young. But how did you know where to step? He asked once. She smiled, almost with sadness. You don't? Step to see. You see because you step. Lucien kept that phrase deep inside. Every night, lying in his little bed, he closed his eyes and imagined the bridge forming under his feet. He saw himself walking, wind on his face, the scent of the river, and the certainty of arriving. He didn't know exactly where he wanted to go, but something inside told him that beyond the river, life would look different, and maybe he would find what he didn't even know he was looking for. He began to prepare in secret, not with tools, but with thoughts. Every day, before the sun rose, he would go to the riverbank and whisper words to the emptiness. I believe in you, even if I don't see you. The villagers watched with pity. He'll end up drowning, they said. But Lucien didn't care, because each time he whispered, something changed within him. Not outside, not yet, but inside, where bridges are truly built. The days passed, and Lucien kept returning to the river, not to force it, not to challenge it, but to listen, to feel. He realized that silence was also a kind of map, that some answers only emerged when the mind stopped asking and began trusting. One morning, just before dawn, he felt something different. The fog was thicker than usual, but it wasn't cold. It felt warm, like a hug. And for a second, just a second, Lucien saw a glimmer, a thin shimmer over the water. It vanished quickly, but it was enough. That day, he walked with more confidence. His whispers grew stronger. He no longer said, "I believe," he said, "I am ready." He wasn't sure why, but something in him had changed. The village children started watching him. At first, they laughed. Then, they grew curious. "What are you doing?" one of them asked. "Training my soul to remember," he replied. They didn't understand, but they started to sit with him. Not every day, not for long, but they sat and listened, and sometimes they whispered too. Over time, Lucien built a kind of invisible ritual. He stepped barefoot on the damp grass, closed his eyes, placed his hand over his heart, and said, "Guide me to what already exists." It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a spell. It was a command of truth, as if he were reminding the universe of something it had promised. And in return, he began to notice changes, not in the river, not in the bridge, but in his breath, in his dreams, in the way he no longer felt like someone waiting, but like someone preparing to arrive. One night, in a dream, he saw an old man sitting in the middle of the river. He wasn't wet. He wasn't floating. He was simply there, with eyes like stars and a voice made of wind. "Why do you come here, boy?" Lucien answered without fear. "Because I know the bridge exists." The man smiled, then stopped waiting for it to appear. "It appears when you walk." When Lucien woke, the words echoed like thunder and stayed etched inside him. The next morning, he didn't go to the edge to whisper. He went to walk. Lucien took his first step onto the damp earth, the same spot where the mist met the river. Nothing was visible. No wood, no stone, no rope. But his foot did not sink. It remained steady, as if supported by something that wasn't there just moments before. He took another step, and another. The villagers from afar watched with wide eyes, but Lucien wasn't watching them. His eyes were half closed, his breath slow, his mind still. With each step, the fog seemed to part, just enough to reveal the shimmer beneath. Not a full bridge, not even a shape, just the feeling of support. He kept walking, not questioning, not needing to understand. That day, he crossed halfway, then stopped. He sat right there, above the water, and whispered, "Let me become worthy of finishing." And the bridge faded. He smiled. It wasn't time yet. He returned to land and spent days in silence, weeks even. He began helping the village in quiet ways, fixing tools, repairing fences, listening to the elders, planting herbs by the river. People began to notice something different about him. Not louder, not brighter, but deeper, as if he had found something they couldn't name. Children stopped calling him crazy. They started asking questions. And when he answered, he didn't speak of the bridge. He spoke of belief, of rhythm, of aligning thoughts with silence. "The mind is the soil," he said once. "Whatever you place there with care and repetition, it grows." The old baker, whose shop was failing, began whispering to his bread in the mornings. A young girl, once afraid of everything, started drawing the bridge in her notebook over and over, with different colors. Little by little, belief returned to the village. Not loud, not grand, just consistent. Lucien returned to the river one afternoon, as if called. He did not speak. He only breathed. and the mist opened completely for the first time. There it was, an entire path of light and warmth, stretching across the river like a ribbon of air and promise. But this time, it wasn't just for him. The villagers followed, not with urgency, but with reverence. One by one, they stepped onto the invisible path, and with each footfall, the bridge revealed itself. If belief echoed and solidified through shared silence. Children laughed softly, elders wept without shame, and Lucien remained at the center, neither leading nor watching, simply present. That night, something shifted in the air. The fog that once blanketed the village became a gentle breeze, and dreams, once restless, turned calm and vivid. People spoke less and listened more, not just to others, but to the quiet voice within. Shops reopened, not for profit, but for purpose. Gardens flourished, not from better soil, but from hands that believed in the harvest before the seed. The river that once divided became a place of gathering, and the bridge remained, invisible to outsiders. Tourists came, took photos, and left, saying, "There's nothing there." But those who paused, those who breathed deeply, those who remembered something long buried within, sometimes saw a shimmer, sometimes felt a step where there was none. Years passed. Lucien grew old, though no one noticed when his hair turned white. One morning, he stood at the edge of the water again. He did not carry anything. No staff, no bag, just presence. He took a deep breath, and the bridge opened completely, from end to end, gleaming in the morning light. Without a word, he walked across and did not return. Some say he became part of the mist. Others say he found what lay on the other side. But the villagers knew the truth. He didn't leave. He simply became the belief itself. And to this day, when someone stands at the river's edge with pure hope in their heart, the bridge appears again, soft as memory, strong as trust. Because the mind, when still and certain, calls into form what the eyes cannot see. And sometimes, the greatest paths in life are not built, they are believed into being. The map that only worked when you were come, no one knew exactly where the map had come from. It wasn't found in a museum or a dusty old attic. It simply appeared one morning at the doorstep of a woman who had almost stopped believing in direction. Her name was Mariana. She lived on top of a quiet hill in a house with chipped walls and a heart even more cracked. Life hadn't been kind lately. Everything she tried failed. Every plan collapsed. Every dream postponed until further notice. And that morning, she was sitting with a cold cup of tea and tired eyes when she saw the paper, carefully folded, slipped under the door like a secret, knocking gently. At first, it looked like a child's drawing, scribbled lines, strange curves, symbols she didn't recognize. No cities, no roads, no compass. Just a small sentence written at the bottom. "This map only works when you are calm." She laughed softly. "What a joke," she whispered, but something in her chest tightened, like a whisper from another time, so she kept it. That night, she couldn't sleep. Thoughts spun fast, voices of worry too loud, bills, deadlines, old regrets. She looked at the map again. Nothing happened. It remained the same blur of lines. "Of course," she murmured. "Calm. Who even has that these days?" But somewhere deep, a part of her wanted to try, just for curiosity, just to see. The next morning, before doing anything else, she sat by the window, closed her eyes, took 3 deep breaths. No rush, no need to fix life in 5 minutes, just the air, in and out, in and out. Slowly, something softened in her shoulders. The noise inside got quieter. When she opened her eyes and unfolded the paper again, something was different. One of the symbols had shifted. A line that used to go nowhere now curved gently to a mark. She hadn't noticed before. She blinked. Was it her imagination? She tried again the next day. This time, after listening to her favorite music and smiling at the sunlight that slipped through the curtains. Again, the map changed. Another mark moved. Another path appeared. It was as if the map reflected her own state of mind, chaotic when she was, clearer when she wasn't. Over time, Mariana began to understand. The map didn't show a place, but a state. It wasn't guiding her to a destination. It was reminding her how to walk. She started to breathe before decisions, to pause before reacting, to walk slower, speak softer, judge less, and the map responded. New paths unfolded, not on the paper, but in life. A neighbor she never spoke to offered a job opportunity. An old idea she'd abandoned resurfaced with clarity. Even her garden, once dry, began to bloom. Little things, quiet changes, but real. People around her noticed. "You look different," they'd say lighter. She smiled and said nothing, because how could she explain a map that only appeared in silence, that only whispered in the pauses between chaos? One day, a friend came to visit in Jesus. Overwhelmed, Mariana gave her tea and a copy of the map, drawn by her own hand now, and said, "Just one thing. It won't guide you until you stop trying to control everything. Just be still." Then, it shows the way. Years later, Mariana's house remained simple, the walls still cracked, but the air inside was different. There was warmth, stillness, grace. The map was framed near the door not as a decoration, but as a reminder that the world doesn't always respond to force. Sometimes it bends for those who soften, and those who truly learn to calm their inner storm. Find that life itself becomes the map, the vault that only opened with kind words in the city where everyone rushed and spoke loudly. There was an old vault standing quietly in the middle of the main square. No one knew who had placed it there. It had no visible lock, no sign of rust. Just a block of golden metal with a small, nearly faded inscription. Only the right word will unlock what is ready to bloom. For years, people tried everything. They banged on it, kicked it, entered codes and passwords, used tools. Nothing worked. Most gave up after just a few minutes. They called it the useless box. One impatient man even tried to remove it with a crane. The vault didn't move an inch. Then, on an ordinary late afternoon, a child approached, not to open it, just to look. She had no rush, no expectations, only calm curiosity. She sat near it and whispered softly, "You're beautiful." The vault made a faint metallic sound, but no one noticed except her. The next days, she returned, each time bringing different words. "You are mysterious. I like you. Thank you for being here." Okay. And with each phrase, the soft click repeated. An internal shift, almost too gentle to hear. Then, after 7 days, she looked at the vault and said sweetly, "It's okay if you take your time. I believe in you." And the vault opened. It didn't explode. It didn't shine. Simply opened. Inside were golden coins, old, clean, flawless, and a small note. Prosperity blooms where kindness lives. The world opens itself to those who speak with respect. The news spread. People began to treat the vault with reverence. But it wasn't about the object anymore. It was about language, about how they spoke to others, to themselves, to their days. An elderly woman noticed her days felt lighter when she complimented instead of complained. A merchant shared that his sales improved once he began truly thanking his customers. A quiet boy, often bullied, taped a phrase to his pencil case. "The words I choose build the world I live in." And the most curious thing, new vaults began to appear, not in the square, but in homes, in hearts, in relationships. Small moments of opening, whenever someone chose to say something kind, an unexpected compliment, a silent forgiveness, a thought of gratitude before sleep. Mariana, the girl who first opened the vault, grew up. She never became rich in the traditional sense, but wherever she went, things blossomed. Ideas, projects, connections, because she understood words are invisible keys, and those who learn to use them live in a world that gently opens. The garden that only grew when no one was watching. There was a hidden garden behind an old house, the kind that seemed frozen in time. The man who lived there was a solitary figure named Benjamin. He didn't dislike visitors out of fear, but rather because he believed that some things only bloomed in silence. Everyone in the village knew that behind the faded wooden fences there was something magical, but no one was certain of what it was. Every morning at dawn, Benjamin would leave his house with a small watering can and slow, deliberate steps. He'd cross the backyard and disappear into the trees. No one knew exactly what he did, but with every season, the village was filled with sweet scents, vibrant colors, and birds that came from afar, drawn to something unseen. Some villagers grew curious. They climbed on boxes, peered through cracks in the fence, trying to uncover the secret. But oddly, whenever they looked in, the garden seemed ordinary. Low trees, tall grass, no flowers in sight. Everything changed when a little girl named Eliza got lost while playing and accidentally wandered into the backyard. She didn't look around. She was too busy searching for the ball she had thrown. Without realizing, she stepped into the center of the garden. And that's when she saw a lilac flower, slowly blooming right before her eyes. Then another, and another. Startled and amazed, she ran to tell the adults. They returned with her, but the flowers were gone. Everything had vanished. In the days that followed, Benjamin began leaving handwritten notes on the village walls. Phrases like, "The most precious things grow in the dark," or "The universe blooms when we stop trying to control." People began to reflect. They started watering their plants without expecting praise, cooking with care even if no one complimented them, doing good even when no one was watching. And without realizing it, they began to reap more. A woman drowning in debt said she began to prosper when she stopped counting every cent she gave away. An anxious young man shared he slept better once he put his phone down and simply breathed. A disheartened teacher found herself smiling again as she prepared her lessons. just to see the spark in curious little eyes. Benjamin's garden became a living metaphor, something real, yet only visible when attention wasn't demanding, when ego was quiet, when intention was pure. Eliza grew up and told the story many times. She would say the secret to life was to plant with faith and forget the clock for a while. Because sometimes what we need most only grows when we stop watching. The painting that created the future 4 years. In a forgotten coastal village, nestled between the gray sky and a restless sea, lived a man named Raoul. He wasn't seen as important. He wasn't a fisherman, a merchant, or a preacher. Just a quiet painter who lived in a damp little house with peeling walls and windows always open to the salty wind. His only companion was a canvas far too large for the space, propped on a worn-out easel, surrounded by brushes stained with old colors. But there was something peculiar about that canvas. It was never finished. No matter how much Raoul painted each day, the image seemed to vanish overnight, as if it refused to be completed. Neighbors whispered he was cursed. Others claimed he had gone mad. But Raoul didn't care. He kept painting, patiently, faithfully. He believed that the canvas was a kind of mirror, a reflection of what did not yet exist, but was quietly forming somewhere beyond the visible. Every morning, he would rise early, prepare an herbal tea, and gaze at the canvas in silence. Then, closing his eyes, he'd breathe deeply and whisper, "Show me what is to come." And then he began. He painted houses where there were only ruins. He painted smiles where there had been sorrow. He painted harvests on lands that had never borne fruit. Each brushstroke was a silent decree, a seed planted with color. Strangely, over time, the things Raoul painted began to happen. An old man who was starving found work from a traveler. A hopeless young woman gave birth to twins. A neglected patch of soil bloomed with flowers. Coincidence? That's what they said. But Raoul knew better. He wasn't a magician. He was an ordinary man who had discovered a path from within. He didn't paint to see. He painted to create. One night, a violent storm swept through the village. The power failed. Roofs, trees, and memories were torn away by the wind. When the dawn came, many wept for what they had lost. But Raoul stood still before his canvas. For the first time, the painting had not disappeared. It remained whole. And within it, the village was rebuilt. Soft colors, reborn flowers, calm faces. Raoul understood. The painting hadn't faded because he had become the painting. He no longer needed the canvas to envision the future. His mind had become the brush, his heart the palette, and his quiet faith the invisible varnish that made dreams real. The next day, without a word, he began helping others. He took fallen wood and crafted benches. He replanted gardens. He told stories of a better time yet to come. The children listened as if to music, the adults as if to hope. Slowly, everyone began to imagine, to create with their minds. A woman who had never drawn began to embroider joyful scenes. A young man without a job wrote letters to companies filled with optimism and bold goals. It was as if the entire village remembered that the future is not a place we arrive at, but something we build from within. Years later, Raoul passed on. He left his canvas still bearing marks of unfinished attempts at the village school. There, they wrote, "Paint here what you believe." And since then, the canvas has never been empty. The drawings change, yes, but they never disappear. Because an entire village learned that painting the future is an act of quiet courage, and that the mind is the most powerful place from which any miracle can begin. When the lights go out, when sleep arrives gently, it is in that space between waking and dreaming that the invisible brushes continue their dance. It is there, in the silence of the soul, that life whispers, "Show me what is to come." And if there is faith even, the smallest amount, the colors will find their way. The warehouse that only opened for those who knew how to receive. They said that at the edge of the city, there was a place where everything a person desired already existed, carefully stored inside an old warehouse made of pale wood. It was a simple building without windows, with a single sky blue door that was never locked, but also never opened by force. Many had tried to turn the knob quickly, push it with urgency, even kick it with desperation. None of them got in. Only a few would say that, at a certain moment, when they touched the door with gentleness and respect, it simply opened by itself. Inside, there were no sellers, no prices, no noise. Only silence, the scent of sweet wood, and shelves filled with everything a heart could long for. Peace wrapped in fine fabric, boxes of golden courage, tiny jars of quiet joy, bottles filled with glowing ideas. And there were envelopes, many of them. Inside were forgotten projects, abandoned talents, and even wishes that had never been spoken out loud, but that the universe had heard anyway. The warehouse, they said, was a reflection of the subconscious, a mirror of the true intentions. Each soul holds, but it would only open for those who had learned to receive. Not those who begged in despair, nor those who gave with guilt, but those who accepted with gratitude and presence. There was a woman named Ilda who lived nearby. Simple, a caretaker of plants and elderly people. She always gave, always offered. But every time someone tried to give back, she would say, "No need. I have everything I need." Her home was full of life, but her heart, empty. One day, a blind old woman held her hands tightly and said, "You know how to give, but you don't know how to receive. And without that, the cycle never completes." Hilda smiled politely, but those words lingered in her mind. That night, she had a dream. She stood before the sky blue warehouse. She reached for the doorknob with determination, but nothing happened. Then, in the dream, she let go, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I allow." And the door opened slowly. When she woke up, something felt different. She spent the day trying to understand. Later, as she watered a neighbor's plants, he offered her a basket of fruit. Instinctively, she went to refuse, as always, but something inside her said, "Accept it." She stretched out her arms, took the basket, and thanked him with tears in her eyes. That night, she returned to the warehouse in her dreams. The door was slightly open. She entered. Inside, she saw a box with her name on it. When she opened it, she found small tokens of everything she had once dreamed of and forgotten. Ideas she had abandoned, believing she didn't deserve them. Gifts she had never asked for, but that had been waiting all along just for her permission to exist. Over time, Ilda began to accept invitations, compliments, and help, not from neediness, but from balance. She learned that prosperity is not a scream that demands, nor a plea made in fear. It is a whisper that says, "Yes, I accept the good that's coming. Yes, I trust." And the more she received with an open heart, the more new things began to appear. Small, everyday miracles, new client, a sudden idea, an unexpected healing. Ilda didn't just change her routine. She changed the way she spoke to herself. She stopped apologizing for dreaming big. She stopped believing that having less was a sign of humility. She began to see abundance as a dance, one step to give, another to receive. And then she finally understood. The warehouse had always been there. It wasn't built by someone else, nor did it depend on luck. It was hers. It was part of the mind that knows everything is possible, and had only been waiting for the simplest gesture. Permission, the clock that ran late. Only for those who doubted, they used to say that in a quiet village surrounded by silent mountains, there was a small clock hanging from the tower in the main square. It wasn't an ordinary clock. Time there felt different. Some swore it always ran fast, others that it was constantly late. But one thing was certain, it never failed those who believed. For the rest, time slipped like fine sand through their fingers, always too fast or too slow. No one knew why. They just whispered with a mix of respect and unease, "The tower clock has a life of its own." Among the villagers lived a young man named Miguel. He was the son of a seamstress and the grandson of a cobbler. He grew up among threads, nails, and stories told at dusk. But what Miguel really wanted was to be an inventor. His mind sparkled with ideas like fireflies. Yet, whenever he tried to bring something to life, the voice of doubt echoed, "It's not time yet. You don't have the right tools or the knowledge." And time, as if it heard his fear, would stall. Days dragged, ideas faded. Everything flowed like a river clogged with stone. One night, as he walked past the square, Miguel noticed something different. The clock glowed with a subtle golden hue, as if calling him. He stepped closer, and for the first time, he saw something he had never noticed before. At the base of the dial, an old inscription almost worn away. It read, "Time bends to the belief of those who do not wait to deserve." That phrase echoed in his mind. He went home and, for the first time, decided to act as if he already had everything he needed. The next morning, he rose early. He sketched a new project, simple but possible. He used wood scraps from his grandfather's workshop, wires from a broken lamp, and gears from an old radio. He built, tested, failed, rebuilt, and while he worked, something curious happened. Time began to flow. People started noticing him. A local teacher invited him to present his project. A tourist passing through bought one of his inventions as a souvenir. And then came more. It was as if time had turned in his favor. Miguel understood. The clock didn't run fast or slow. It adjusted to the inner state of each person. Those who believed, those who moved with quiet certainty before seeing results, received time's full support. But those who doubted watched the hands freeze. The secret was never the clock. It was the rhythm of the heart, the vibration of the mind, the frequency of self-worth. Years later, Miguel became known for his creations, simple objects that changed people's lives, a tea, yet he never left the village. And always, before starting something new, he'd pass through the square, glance up at the tower, and whisper, "Time already knows. So do I." Because, deep down, he understood the universe doesn't respond to urgency or despair. It responds to the calm certainty of those who already see themselves there before they even take the first step. And in that quiet village, the clock kept ticking not to the world's time, but to the soul's. The man who planted hope without seeing the harvest, he woke up every day before the sun rose. Calloused hands, a face marked by time, and a shirt always damp with morning dew. His name was Mr. Vicente, a farmer who never had luxury, but carried a peace in his eyes no one could quite explain. He lived in a wooden cottage at the foot of a hill, surrounded by a vast field he called My Little Babylon. People in the village didn't understand why he insisted on tending to that dry land, which hadn't yielded fruit in years. But he knew something they didn't. He believed the earth listens to the thoughts of the one who walks upon it. Mr. Vicente would spend hours with his hoe, but also with silence. As he dug holes, he whispered softly, "Everything I plant with faith grows in the right time. Abundance begins when I believe it's already on the way." And even when the sky stayed shut for weeks and no rain came, he never complained. He would simply close his eyes and say, "The water will come," because what begins within always finds its way outside. One day, a young man from the city stopped by, intrigued. He watched the old man speaking to the seeds as if they were people. He chuckled and asked, "Do you really believe this land will give you anything?" Mr. Vicente simply answered, "It already is. You just can't see it." The boy frowned. "But there's nothing growing." And the man smiled, wiping his forehead with an old cloth. "Oh, but there is. It's growing inside me. Every day I come here with hope. I become richer within. And when wealth lives inside us, sooner or later it shows on the outside." Days passed. The rains finally came. And, surprisingly, the land began to bloom. First came shy little leaves, then golden flowers like the sun, and then firm, sweet fruits just like the old days. People started talking about Mr. Vicente's field again. Some said it was a miracle. Others claimed he had a secret. But no one realized the only secret was his silence, his certainty. The soil simply answered what he had believed long before, that everything nurtured with intention will bloom, even when it seems impossible. That invisible roots form before any tree is seen, and that life always hears those who plant with their hearts. Mr. Vicente never made the news. He never truly got rich, but everyone who visited his field left changed, calmer, more confident, because there was something in that land, something in that quiet presence that taught without words. He continued to tend the field until the end of his days, and even after he was gone, the flowers kept blooming there, because the earth held not only seeds, but the vibration of someone who believed before eyes could see. And maybe that's what life does to those with quiet faith. First, it tests, then it reveals. First, it stays silent, then it blossoms. Because prosperity isn't what you own. It's what you feel you already have, even when the ground looks empty, and that no one can take from you. The warehouse that only opened for those who knew how to receive the notebook that rewrote what was inside. She found the notebook by chance, on a morning when she no longer believed in anything. It lay near a bench in the park with a faded blue cover and worn-out edges like it had lived through many hands. Elisa thought about leaving it there after all. It was just an old notebook. She opened the first page and found a sentence written in uneven but steady handwriting. Whatever you write with truth changes what is written inside. She stared at it for a few seconds, then flipped to the next page. It was blank. If it were waiting for her, Elisa took the notebook home without knowing why. That night, after much hesitation, she picked up a random pen and wrote in small letters, "I don't know what to expect from life anymore, but deep down, I wish I still had hope." The next day, she woke up with a different feeling. It wasn't happiness. It was a lighter silence. And when she went to the market, the cashier smiled at her as if they'd known each other for years. A small thing, but it touched her deeply. That night, she wrote again. "Today, I felt like maybe there's still room for good things." And she slept. That's how Elisa's days began. Writing before bed. But not just anything. Writing as if each word was a seed. As if what she wrote could slowly rewrite what was tangled inside her. I want to find a job that makes me feel useful. I want to believe in my worth again. I want to wake up feeling like I'm not alone. Over time, it wasn't just the writing that changed. The way she looked out the window, washed her face, replied to good mornings, it all began to shift. The notebook didn't perform miracles, but something inside her started to transform, as if the words were paving new paths, like bridges toward a version of herself that had long been waiting to exist. And soon, small coincidences started to haven't an unexpected call offering her an interview, a compliment from someone she never expected, a borrowed book that said exactly what she needed to hear. And every time something good happened, she returned to the notebook. She wrote, as if gathering proof that life was, indeed, responding. One day, in the middle of a notebook, she wrote, "I am capable of creating the life I want, one line each night." And at that moment, she knew something had shifted inside her. Not because everything was perfect. There were still hard days, late bills, insecurities. But now, something bigger had taken root. The certainty that she could speak to her own soul. When the notebook ran out of pages, Elisa bought another. Not as old, but with blank pages ready to mirror what she wanted to become. And so, every night before sleep, she kept writing. Not out of habit, but out of connection, out of self-love, out of faith, because in the end, she understood the outside world can be noisy, but life truly changes when we rewrite what is written within. The man who planted beyond the soil. They say the land doesn't just shape hands, it shapes minds. And with Jeremiah, that was true. He grew up between hoes, wooden fences, and the rhythmic sound of branches swaying in the wind. The red earth taught him more than any school taught him timing. It taught him silence, taught him patience. Jeremiah woke before the sun, and while most people were still dreaming, he was already walking the furrows of his field, wearing an old hat that shaded his eyes, and a mind wandering in a world all his own. But there was something curious about him. He spoke to the seeds. He whispered as he placed them into the soil. Sometimes, he said, you will feed families. Other times, you'll be the answer someone needs. No one knew if he did this out of faith or habit, but everyone noticed something different about his crops. They grew fuller, stronger, more beautiful. Even when the rain was scarce, his corn stood tall, dancing in the wind with abundance. One day, someone asked him what his secret was. He simply said, I plant twice, once in the soil and once in my mind. Few understood, but Jeremiah did. He knew that while his hands worked the earth, his mind worked another reality. He imagined himself surrounded by prosperity, by gratitude, with a barn full, not just of grain, but of peace. And every night, even when exhausted, he'd whisper to himself, tomorrow will be even more fertile. I am good soil for dreams. To the village, Jeremiah was just a simple man. But inside, he was rich. Rich in purpose. Rich in presence. His home never lacked anything. Yet, there was no luxury, either only enough abundance, flowing from effort and the quiet faith he cultivated from the inside out. Over time, Jeremiah began teaching the young, not with grand speeches, but through the way he saw the world. Don't curse the earth, he'd say, she listens. The boys would laugh but obey. They planted with more care. They spoke to the seeds, and to everyone's surprise, their harvests began to change too. Years passed. Jeremiah grew old, but never left the fields. One day, a reporter came by, wanting to do a story on traditional farming methods. When she asked about his technique, he answered, I farm like I pray. Each step is a request. Each movement, a thank you. The woman went silent. In that moment, she understood what he had done. He used his mind as invisible fertilizer. While others sowed with tools alone, he sowed with intention. And maybe that was Jeremiah's real secret. He never separated work from belief. He never planted with small expectations. He always believed that, just as the earth responds to rain, life responds to what we quietly sow within ourselves, night after night. They say his land still bears fruit. But the most beautiful thing he left behind was the certainty that prosperity doesn't begin in your pocket, begins in your mind, in the belief that even the smallest seed can feed the world. If it's watered with hope. The boy who collected shadows, they said he was quiet. But what no one knew was that he simply listened too much. His name was Joe, and his eyes always seemed to search for something adults had long forgotten. He lived in a small house at the edge of the village, surrounded by trees that danced even when the wind didn't come. His favorite pastime wasn't running, nor flying kites, nor playing ball. Joe collected shadows. Whenever someone felt sad, angry, or tired, he would approach gently, offer a smile, and whisper, "You can give me your shadow if you'd like." Most would laugh, thinking it was just a child's game. But some accepted, and Joe would walk away as if he were truly carrying something invisible in his pockets. In the back of his yard, there was a wooden box where he kept the shadows. He wasn't afraid of them. On the contrary, he treated them with care. At night, he would open the lid, speak to them softly, and say, "It's okay, I see you, and I know you're not the end." It was as if, somehow, he knew that even pain could become a seed. One day, an old man arrived in the village. He looked exhausted as if carrying the weight of the world. He sat on a bench in the square, lowered his head, and sighed so deeply. It seemed to bend the clouds. Joe approached. "Would you like to give me your shadow?" The man looked at him, too weary to smile. He just nodded. Joe held out his hands as if receiving something precious. That night, he spent hours with the new shadow. He soon realized it was not just sorrow. It held longing, bruised hope, and forgotten dreams. And then, for the first time, he did something new. He stitched the shadow onto a small piece of blue fabric. With golden thread, he embroidered around it the words, "You can still begin." Again, the next morning, he left the cloth beside the man, who was still sleeping. When the man woke up and read the words, something shifted in his eyes. It was as if he remembered something he always knew but had forgotten. From that day on, Joe began to sew every shadow he received. He turned them into little flags of hope, stitched with patience and faith. And in doing so, his box slowly emptied. But his heart grew full, because he understood what the world calls weakness, when cared for with love, becomes a strength no one can take away. Years passed. Joe grew older, but he never stopped collecting. Now he was known as the man who turned pain into maps. His embroidered pieces were sent far and wide, and many said that just touching them brought relief. He never charged for them. He only asked one thing: when you heal, give your shadow to someone who hasn't found the light yet. And so, shadow by shadow, Joe sowed seeds of healing, showing that the rarest kind of prosperity is the one born from embracing what the world tried to throw away, because, in the end, it's not the light that heals. It's the shadows we've finally understood that point us back to it. The woman who collected little yeses nobody noticed when she arrived in the village. She came alone, carrying only a small suitcase and a notebook that seemed older than her. Her name was Isadora, and she never spoke much, but those who watched her from afar noticed that every morning she would leave her tiny house and walk through the streets as if searching for something invisible. She stopped at the bakery door, smiled at the scent, and wrote something in her notebook. She sat on a bench near the square, closed her eyes for a few seconds, then wrote again. Day after day, the same thing, until one child got curious and asked, "What are you doing?" She answered gently, "I'm collecting little yeses." The child didn't understand, but nodded and smiled. Over time, people started to realize that things changed after she passed. A discouraged merchant made his first big sale in months. A woman who hadn't laughed in weeks giggled alone on the bench. A man on the verge of giving up found a solution the next morning. None of this seemed connected. But for Isadora, it all made perfect sense. She believed that every yes in life, no matter how small, was like a seed. And the more you noticed them, the more they multiplied. A ray of sun warming your skin. Yes, the smell of coffee in the morning. Yes, a stranger's smile. Yes, the silence after a long day. Yes, she wrote them down. Every yes she collected was a reminder to her subconscious that the world was not hostile, that life had details that pointed toward abundance, not lack. People began to approach her. At first, shyly. "Can I give you a yes?" one asked. "Of course," she said. They told her stories. A new job, a friend who returned, a meal after days of hunger, a tiny hope, still flickering. Isadora listened and wrote. One day, someone asked if she was a fairy. She laughed. No, I'm just someone who realized that the mind believes in what we repeat. So I choose to repeat what gives me light. She taught others, not with long speeches or complex techniques, just with her presence, she said. Your mind listens even when you're silent. So offer it good things to hear. The children started their own notebooks. Teenagers wrote graffiti on the walls saying yes lives here. And slowly, the village that once looked tired started to breathe differently, as if every corner was now blessed by invisible hands whispering yes to the wind. Isadora eventually left, just as quietly as she came. But in every house, there was someone who had learned to notice small miracles. Her notebook she left behind on the bench where everything had begun. On the first page, only one sentence was written. Prosperity doesn't come when everything changes. It comes when you begin to see that the good was always there, waiting for you to say yes. The baby who spoke only words of prosperity in the most forgotten corner of the city, where houses were made of leftovers, roofs wept leaks, and hope seemed to have moved elsewhere. There lived a young woman named Eliza. She had almost nothing, not family, not education, not a steady job. She survived on odd jobs and donations that came like the wind, unpredictable and fleeting. Her home was a crooked wooden shack with thin walls and a dirt floor. But there was something about her that no one understood. Eliza smiled. She was pregnant, alone, no partner, no plan, no support, and yet she smiled. Because inside her belly, she said, a promise was growing. When the baby was born, the neighbors expected cries, illness, hunger, but the baby was different. His name was Soul, and Soul did not cry like the others. He smiled. From his very first days, when his eyes could barely open, he smiled as if he saw something no one else could. And when he started to babble, no one believed it. His first words weren't mama or water. They were abundance, miracle, joy. The neighbors looked at each other with suspicion. A child born in misery, speaking as if he had come from a palace. But Eliza was never surprised, she said. He's only remembering what my soul whispered to him every day during pregnancy. Soul grew up with few toys, but many smiles. And every time someone walked by complaining about life, the boy would gently interrupt, his voice sweet but certain. Did you give thanks today? Or, life listens better when you believe in it. People would laugh, a bit confused, but they always returned, because after hearing Soul, something shifted. It was as if a seed had been planted, a seed that whispered, it's possible, even here. With time, the little home began to flourish. The garden bloomed without Eliza ever planting a thing. Fruit appeared when no one had touched the soil. The walls that once felt cold now held warmth and color. One neighbor after another began to notice. Everything around Soul prospered. Whatever he touched flourished. Not because he was magical, but because his faith was silent and strong enough to mold the world around him. A man who drank daily gave up alcohol after Soul told him, you are stronger than what weakens you. A woman who lived in sadness smiled again when Soul held her hand and said, you can still bloom, even after the winter. And so, the boy transformed everything never raising his voice, only with words. Words that seemed simple, but carried ancient power. Power born from a mind still untouched by the fear of the world. Eliza watched everything in silence. She had always known. From the beginning, she knew. Because during the coldest nights, when there was nothing to eat, she would place her hands on her belly and say, "You are welcome. You are light. You are prosperous. And together we will be abundance, even where they say there's only lack." She programmed that child with love, with faith, with words. And he was born remembering. They say soul never grew in the usual sense. He remained small and gentle, but his presence was larger than any body. In time, more and more people came to him. Some said just seeing him was enough. Others cried at the sound of his voice. But what no one knew was, soul didn't perform miracles. He only awakened. He awakened what had been sleeping in each one, the memory that prosperity is possible, even in pain, even in scarcity, even in darkness. Because abundance doesn't begin with results, begins with the invisible seed we plant with words. And soul was just the proof that words are doors. And when a mother chooses the right doors to open, even the impossible finds a place to be born. The baby born among words of gold, everyone in the village said she was poor. Her dress was old, her feet walked barefoot, and the house she lived in barely stood on its own. But there was something strange about her presence, something no one could quite explain. She smiled. She smiled like someone who knew something the world had long forgotten. Her name was Dahlia. She was just over 20 years old and 9 months, pregnant. The child's father had left before even knowing she was expecting. And the neighbors, with pity in their voices, would always say, "You have to be strong, Dahlia. Life will be hard for your baby." But Dahlia would only whisper back, "He will be born rich." They laughed at her. Poor girl, poverty must have taken her sanity. But Dahlia didn't answer with anger. She answered with words. Every night she would sit in her rocking chair and speak to her belly, as if telling a secret to the universe. "You are blessed. You are prosperous. You were born to live in abundance. Wherever you step, goodness will bloom. Wherever you rest, peace will multiply. Wherever you dream, the world will transform." Time passed. The baby was born on a calm midnight. Rain fell gently, as if the sky was washing the earth to receive him. Dahlia named him Ben, and even without new diapers or a fancy crib, she wrapped him in a blue cloth and whispered, "You are wealth in the form of life." Ben grew up hearing words the world didn't often say. At 3 years old, he would say, "I trust life." At 6, he'd say, "Everything works for my good." At 10, he wrote in a notebook, "I am more than what I see. Inside me is a seed of gold." The neighbors watched in awe. The boy had calm eyes and steady steps. He studied with focus, but also listened with care. When he fell, he didn't cry. In despair, he said, "I've learned." When he lost, he said, "It's just a cycle." When he won, he said, "Sharing is double the wealth." At 18, without ever asking for help, he opened a small repair shop. He started fixing radios and watches. Then he created a system to reuse parts and teach other young people how to do the same. The project grew. It became a company, then a foundation. And finally, an institute offering free education to youth in need. One day, someone asked Ben, "How did you overcome poverty?" He smiled with the calm eyes he'd inherited from his mother and answered, "I never accepted it as mine. Since I was a child, I heard words that told me who I was, before the world could try to convince me otherwise." Dahlia, now elderly, still sat in the same rocking chair, and when the sun went down, she would close her eyes and whisper to herself, "Everything sown with faith blooms in the right time." And in that forgotten village, where scarcity once filled the air, now people spoke of abundance, because prosperity did not begin with money. It began with a mother who refused the poverty of words. The girl who only planted yellow roses. They say that in every village, there is always someone who seems out of place, someone who walks at a different rhythm, who carries in their eyes a kind of hope the rest of the world has forgotten. In the village of Clearstone, that person was a girl named Ela. She didn't speak much, but her gestures seemed to tell stories no one else knew how to hear. She wore a faded white dress, a big ribbon in her hair, and carried a small wooden basket on her arm. Inside the basket, there were only seeds of a single flower, yellow roses, while others planted beans, tomatoes, and sunflowers. Eloa walked along the village edges, searching for little patches of land to drop her seeds, sometimes between cracked sidewalks, sometimes in forgotten flower pots or among the stones where nothing ever grew. When asked why she only planted yellow roses, she smiled gently and said, "Because they are the flowers of faith." The villagers, however, found it amusing. "That girl lives in a dream. Those flowers don't even have a scent. What's the use of planting something no one buys?" But Eloa didn't reply. She kept spreading her seeds with the patience of someone who knows the right time never rushes. There was something in her silence that unsettled people, maybe because it reminded them of a kind of purity they had already lost. The seasons changed. Harvests came and went. Other villagers' fields bloomed and then withered. A drought came. The soil hardened. Gardens failed, and the village fell into fear. Food grew scarce. Stores closed, and gradually the tone of everyone became gray. But then something began to happen. Along the curves of paths, in the cracks of stones, even on abandoned rooftops, yellow flowers began to appear, strong, luminous. They bloomed in impossible places, as if whispering, "There is still beauty where no one expects it." People started approaching. Some cried without knowing why. Others picked a single rose and said they felt better. They couldn't explain it, but something shifted. Eloa kept walking. Now, her basket never seemed too empty. Children followed her. Some older women asked for seeds. An old man who once mocked her began caring for a garden full of yellow roses. The village smiled again, but in a different way, not from abundance, but from lightness, as if the presence of those flowers spoke directly to each subconscious. You can begin again. One day, a reporter from the city heard about the village of yellow roses. She visited, took pictures, wrote about the girl who planted faith. And without Eloa ever knowing, her story spread far and wide. Letters arrived, packages with seed requests, invitations to interviews, awards, projects, but no one could find her. She had vanished, disappeared like a late afternoon breeze, without fanfare, without farewell. Only the flowers remained, and a small notebook left beside the tallest rose bush in the village, with a handwritten cover for those who once doubted what they carry inside. And inside, just one phrase: what you plant with faith grows where no one believes it can. Since then, every year, at the beginning of spring, the village celebrates Yellow Rose Day, not as just another holiday, but as a quiet reminder that the kind of beauty that truly transforms the world is the one that blooms when no one believes any more. The girl who slept and dreamed she was rich in a small village where the wind seemed to carry the same stories every night lived a girl named Luma. She slept on a thin mattress with blankets that smelled of homemade soap and hope. Her mother often said, "We don't have much, but we have faith." And so the girl grew up not with expensive toys, but with words that warmed her heart. Luma was quiet, but she dreamed big. Every night before falling asleep, she would close her eyes and imagine herself in a different place. A place where the cutlery was golden, the walls whispered poems, and the ceiling shone like stars caught in the sky. No one had ever taught her about wealth, but she felt there had to be more than the hunger that sometimes came. One night, after a long day of chores and silence, Luma lay down and whispered, "If I could dream, I'd want to dream that I'm rich." And then she fell asleep. In her dream, Luma awoke in a bed, soft as a cloud. The light poured in through wide windows, and the floor was warm like an embrace. She rose with a strange feeling. Everything was there, and everything was hers. But it wasn't the gold that shone. It was the feeling of being safe. People in the dream treated her gently, not out of fear, but out of respect. She walked through halls of ancient books, sipped tea from hand-painted cups, and heard soft music playing from the walls. In every corner, there was kindness. In that dream, she didn't need to ask. The doors opened because within her, the belief in lack had disappeared. And then she understood. Being rich wasn't about what you could buy. It was about what you could feel. Luma walked through gardens where everything bloomed at her touch. Roses opened as she passed. Birds followed her in silence. She spoke little, but everything about her said, "I deserve to be here." At one point, she came upon an elderly woman sitting on a stone bench. The woman smiled and said, "You created this place. It was born from the words you whisper before sleep." Luma, surprised, asked, "Is this all just a dream?" The woman replied, "It's a rehearsal. Reality comes next." And slowly, Luma began to wake. She returned to her simple room, her familiar mattress. But something had changed. A peace, a certainty. In the days that followed, nothing changed outwardly. But inside, everything was new. Luma began to walk as if the ground recognized her, to speak as if the world listened. Small gestures returned. As blessings, a neighbor offered her a book. A teacher mentioned a scholarship. A woman at the market gave her a new notebook just because she had dreamed of her. And Luma understood. The mind had shown the path, and the world simply responded. She still went to bed early. But now, every night before closing her eyes, she would say, "Thank you for what is already mine, even if I can't see it yet." And she would sleep, smiling, because she knew that wealth is what you believe in so sweetly that the universe has no choice but to bring it to you. in the right time, in the rhythm of the soul. Because sometimes everything begins with a girl who dares to dream that she's already rich. The brothers who didn't believe they could co-create their reality in a small village surrounded by mountains and low-hanging clouds. There lived two brothers, Lucas and Caio. They were simple boys, sons of quiet farmers, raised to believe that the world was just as it was, hard, fixed, and unchangeable. When the sun rose, they would run to the fields. When it rained, they hid as if life had to pause too. And at night, they slept with the same thought. Tomorrow will be the same. Lucas was the elder. He liked to measure time precisely, count the grains of rice, and predict failure before it arrived. Caio, on the other hand, was more distracted. He daydreamed, but over time, he stopped sharing his dreams because he was told, it's better not to expect too much from life. One day, an old man arrived in the village. No one knew where he came from. He carried a crooked walking stick, a light backpack, and eyes that seemed to see beyond what was visible. He stayed only 3 days, but before he left, he pinned a note to the village mill's gate. Reality is a mirror, but it only changes when you change from within. No one paid attention, no one except Caio. For many nights, Caio pondered that phrase, and slowly, a question grew inside him. What if we could co-create life, instead of just obeying whatever it hands us? The next day, he told Lucas, who laughed and brushed it off. Life is what it is. Dreaming too much only leads to disappointment. But Caio didn't stop. He began small. Every morning before heading to the fields, he sat quietly for 5 minutes and whispered to himself, I am co-creating a new path. Even if he didn't know how, he began to imagine things he'd never experienced. A place where his work was valued, where he chose his own hours, where there was abundance of time, food, and peace. While Lucas worked in the fields, cursing the rocks, Caio began to notice flowers growing between them. While Lucas counted losses, Caio counted possibilities. Time passed, and something unusual happened. Without leaving the village, Caio seemed to live in another world. People began seeking him for advice. He received an invitation to teach children how to read. A traveler gifted him a rare sapling as a thank you. Even his crops looked greener. Lucas watched all of it with suspicion. You're lucky, he said. But Caio simply smiled. One stormy night, their house shook. Restless, Lucas walked to his brother's room. He found Caio sitting still, eyes closed, whispering, I believe, even when no one sees. Lucas sat beside him, exhausted. For the first time, he said nothing. He just listened. Days later, something began to shift within him. Not completely, but quietly. He started writing on a folded piece of paper. Today, maybe I can too. And so it was. Slowly, the two began dreaming together. They still planted seeds, still faced rain. But now, within them, there was a new season. They learned that reality responds, not to fear, but to the frequency of what you keep alive. Even when everything outside looks the same, because co-creating isn't about changing the world all at once. It's about changing how you live within it. And in that forgotten village, two brothers rediscovered the power to imagine, with enough faith not to give up. The lady who spoke prosperity into her life, Donna Eulalia, was one of those women. Life forgot to pamper. Widowed for many years, she lived alone in a small clay house on the outskirts of a village, forgotten by progress. The floor was made of packed earth, the roof creaked with the wind, and the furniture, well, it looked like it had given up trying to look new. But there was one thing time couldn't age: her silent faith. Every morning, even before the sun fully woke up, she sat on the edge of her bed, placed her bare feet on the cold floor, and began to speak. Not to God, not to the neighbors, she spoke to herself. To the cracked mirror in front of her, to the silence. She repeated sentences as if planting seeds. I am a magnet for blessings. Money comes to me from unexpected sources. My life is surrounded by abundance. At first, her voice was low, almost like someone ashamed to believe. But day after day, those words gained strength. They became routine. They became habit. They became prayer. The neighbors whispered that Eulalia was going mad. She talks to a broken mirror, they'd say, but she just smiled, because deep in her heart, something had begun to shift. It was subtle, as if the universe was listening. In the first week, she found a crumpled bill lying in her backyard. Coincidence, people thought. The second week, an old friend brought her fresh fruit from the market. Kindness. The third, the local church gave her a basket of food. Charity. But Eulalia saw things differently. Every detail was an answer. Every gesture, a response to what she had been declaring. Every morning, 3 months passed like this. She remained faithful to her ritual. In the morning, affirmations. At night, gratitude. Until one rainy afternoon, a mailman knocked on her door with an envelope she wasn't expecting. Inside was a simple letter and a check, her name written in shaky handwriting. It was from a distant relative she barely remembered, someone who had left part of their inheritance to Eulalia before passing away. The amount was enough to renovate her home, buy new clothes, and ensure she had food for many years. She cried, but not out of surprise. She cried out of confirmation, because deep down, she already knew. Prosperity doesn't come only to those who need. It comes to those who prepare to receive it. The village was stunned. Lucky, they murmured. A miracle, some said. But Eulalia remained the same. She still sat every morning, even after the money arrived, and spoke firmly. Everything I need is on its way. I am already abundant. Because she knew the only fortune that truly matters is the one that begins within. The man who sold words that made people prosper, they said, he sold words, not books, not stories, not speeches, just words. One per person, one at a time, in a small, crooked tent near the edge of town. Muriel sat every morning with a pile of blank envelopes and a single fountain pen. He didn't ask for payment, though people always left something, sometimes coins, sometimes bread, sometimes nothing but a thank you whispered in silence. No one knew where he came from. No one knew why he had chosen that forgotten town, so ordinary that even the wind passed without interest. But over time, something strange began to happen. Those who received his envelopes began to change. A man who had lost everything found a job and started smiling again. A widow who hadn't sung for years started humming in the garden. A child who was always afraid began to sleep with the window open, waiting for dreams. Inside each envelope was just one word, handwritten, firm, and simple. Begin. Listen. Trust. Forgive. Rest. Some words made people cry. Others made them laugh, but all of them moved something inside. How do you know what to write? Someone once asked. Muriel didn't answer. He just smiled with the silence of someone who had already heard that question many times. People said he had a gift. Others said it was a trick. But most, after receiving their word, stopped questioning. They just felt seen, known, as if the word had been waiting for them all their lives. One day, a man who never believed in anything entered the tent. He sat down with arms crossed and eyes full of suspicion. "What will you write for me?" he challenged. Muriel didn't hesitate. He wrote one word and handed it over. Let. The man laughed. Let what? Muriel remained silent. Days later, the man returned. He was changed. He had cried, forgiven, slept for the first time in weeks. That word, it wasn't magic, but it was exactly what I needed. Muriel just nodded. There were those who tried to replicate what he did. They opened shops of affirmations, printed pretty phrases, made digital apps. Something was missing. Muriel didn't choose the words. The words chose the person. And he just listened. He didn't teach. He didn't preach. He just handed over small pieces of paper that touched souls in ways logic couldn't explain. Muriel never advertised. He never expanded. But one by one, people traveled to the town just to sit in silence, just to receive a word. They didn't stay long. They didn't take photos. They just left, lighter, and then changed. Time passed, and Muriel aged slowly. His hair turned silver like the silent dawns when he wrote. The town, now prosperous and calm, carried his words on walls, windows, and shops. There was a grocery store named Gratitude, a bakery called Awakening, and even a bank that preferred to be called Trust. But Muriel spoke less, and less his writing slowed. Not from lack of desire, but because, perhaps, there was less to say, and more to live. Until one day, a child came to him, a simple boy in dirty clothes and eyes full of questions. He didn't ask for money. He didn't want toys. He simply said, "I want to change the world." Muriel looked into his eyes for a long time. Then, with slow hands, he wrote a single word in an envelope and handed it over. The boy opened it and read, "Begin." Nothing more, but it lit a fire in his chest. They say that boy became a great peacemaker, not in headlines, but in the lives he quietly touched, changing hearts and neighborhoods with small, profound acts. That night, Muriel closed his tent for the last time. No one saw. There was no announcement, no farewell sign. He simply felt that he was finished. He walked to the highest field in town, where the wind spoke like an old friend. He sat on the grass, pulled an envelope from his pocket, and opened it slowly. Inside, one word: faith. Written in his own handwriting, but as if left by someone greater. Muriel closed his eyes and smiled. The next morning, the tent was empty. Only a blank sheet of paper remained on the table, with a pen. Beside it, villagers approached in silence. No one touched it. No one took it. The page remained there for days, till someone gently wrote, "So-and-so." A new tradition began. the entire town began leaving words for others, anonymously. Each person wrote and left. Each person took what they needed. The tent was never Muriel's again, but it remained everyone's. And even today, if you're lost, tired, or aimless, and you pass through that village hidden between hills and fog, you might find the tent. And maybe, if the silence inside you is louder than the noise of the world, a word will reach your hands, not with noise, not with promises, but with presence, as if to say, everything you seek is already inside you. It just needs to be awakened, because, after all, the words weren't magical because they were beautiful. They were magical because you believed in them. The boy who drew everything he wanted to have there was a boy named Eli, who lived in a very simple house at the top of a hill. There was no luxury, no toys, no electronics, only an old notebook with yellowed pages and a few pencils he had inherited from his grandfather. But that was enough, because Eli had a secret gift. Everything he drew came true, not in a magical or instant way, but subtly, as if the universe could see with its eyes and respond to what was printed in lines. He would draw a pair of boots, and days later, someone in the village would donate a pair that looked exactly the same. He would draw a hot loaf of bread, and the neighbor would appear with a fresh batch. He didn't tell anyone, he thought. It was just coincidence. Until the day he drew a red bicycle. It was beautiful, with silver details and a little basket in the front. He hung the drawing above his bed, like planting a dream in ink. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Months. Still nothing. Until one day, an old man knocked on the door, offering to fix the roof in exchange for a night's stay. Before bed, the man saw the drawing on the wall and smiled. "Nice bike." "It's just a drawing," Eli said. Without much hope, the man stepped closer and replied, "Nothing is just a drawing. Every stroke is a command. You just have to believe you're requesting it, not just dreaming." The next morning, the man was gone. And in the very spot where the land was always dry, Eli found a red bicycle. From that day on, he started drawing, with intention, not just what he wanted, but who he wished to become. He drew a boy smiling while helping others. He drew the village filled with flowers. He drew books, friends, journeys. Each image was made with care, like a silent prayer. Over time, the adults began to notice something different about him. Not wealth, not fame, but lightness. "How are you so calm?" they would ask Dash. "Because I've already seen everything," he answered. Where? In my notebook, Eli learned that drawing wasn't about controlling the world, but about aligning his heart with what he desired. If he felt sad, he drew a sun. If he felt lost, he drew a compass. If he was afraid, he drew a firm bridge under his feet, and slowly his drawings became maps, not of the outer world, but of the inner one. The village changed with him. People began drawing too, not with skill, but with faith. They drew their dreams, their healing, their reunions. A woman who hadn't walked in years drew herself, picking flowers. Days later, felt strength in her knees. A lonely young man drew, two hands holding each other, and that week, he met someone who changed his life. Eli's notebook became a treasure. There was no rush, no pressure, just the gesture of placing on paper what one wished to feel. As he grew older, Eli taught children how to draw their own destinies. He used to say, "When you create an image, you're telling life, 'This is how I want to feel.' And life responds. It always responds, but it responds with subtlety, like a pencil on paper. And to this day, if you visit that hill, you'll see children drawing under the shade of a tree, laughing, dreaming, and believing that everything begins with a line and a quiet decision to trust." She didn't have much, but nothing ever truly seemed missing. In a small, simple house at the end of a dusty street lived a girl with wide eyes and an entire world invented inside them. While other children drew what they saw, she drew what she dreamed. Her mother worked double shifts to put rice and beans on the table, but she never understood why her daughter kept asking for empty boxes, golden cloths, and lidless jars. "What are these for, girl?" "To build my mansion," she replied. She didn't say it as a joke. She said it with certainty. Each box was a room. Every cloth became a curtain. Every lidless jar turned into a vault of invisible coins. In that small living room, there appeared imaginary rugs, magical staircases, chandeliers made of dreams. While adults saw poverty, she saw potential. While others said, "That's not for us," she smiled and whispered, "Not yet." Every afternoon after school, she put on her faded sparkly dress, grabbed a bottle cap necklace, and announced loudly, "Today, I'm hosting my millionaire guests." She spoke to her dolls as if they were investors. She sat next to the dog and called him the mansion's security guard. She created feasts with backyard fruits and colored water, calling it a gala dinner, and no one could convince her otherwise. Her game was her sanctuary. One day, a neighbor mocked her. "You're not rich, girl. That's all make-believe." She didn't flinch. She answered with the wisdom of someone who had already understood something greater. "I don't need to be yet, but I already am right." Here, she tapped her chest and went back to hosting her party. At night, before sleep, she would talk to herself. But they weren't fantasies, they were commands. "Tomorrow, my business will prosper. Unexpected deposits are on their way. Thank you for another $1 million sale." Her mother, listening from the other room, used to chuckle. "Such a daydreamer," she'd say. But over time, she started noticing something strange. The girl was never sad, never envious, never asked for things they couldn't afford. She just played. She played with such truth that it was as if she truly lived in another dimension. Once, a distant uncle came to visit, a loud businessman with shiny watches. He saw the girl serving invisible champagne in a plastic cup and laughed. "You want to be a millionaire? I already am. I'm just reminding myself every day." He chuckled, but something about that stuck with him. Before leaving, he handed her an old notebook. "Write your ideas in here, future millionaire." She thanked him with sparkling eyes, and that's where it all started. In that notebook, she wrote everything she imagined in her games. Business ideas, product names, imaginary store layouts, notes about the magic toy market. And without even realizing, she was learning, developing, creating an invisible map of her future. She grew up, and life demanded seriousness. But she never stopped playing. In college, she designed advertising campaigns based on her childhood gala parties. At work, she built projects the same way she once stacked cardboard rooms. Then, one idea took off. An educational app for dreaming children, teaching math through invisible coins. reading through imaginary businesses, creativity through paper castles. Investors laughed at first, until they saw the tests and the numbers and the children's glowing eyes. She got funding. She launched, and it exploded. Within a year, she was in magazines, TV interviews, stages, and award shows. But nothing impressed her more than the children's reactions. "It feels like one of us made this," they said. And it was true, because she never stopped being one of them. Deep down, she had never stopped playing. Only now, the world had become her playground. Years later, on a quiet afternoon, she returned to her childhood home. She opened the closet, and there was the notebook, aged, with pages stuck together and faded ink. She smiled and cried, not from emotion, but from gratitude, because every cent, every success, every idea had been born right there, on that living room floor, between empty boxes, lidless jars, and words spoken with conviction. When people ask her secret, she replies, "I never played at being poor. I always played at being rich, and the mind doesn't know the difference." Then she smiles as if she's still 8 years old, because deep down, she still is, and always will be. The baby who repeated golden phrases while sleeping in a village, forgotten by time, where the houses were made of aged wood and the days always seemed cloudy. A baby was born who didn't cry. He didn't laugh, nor did he make the usual sounds. But at night, when everything fell silent, his voice would softly emerge, murmuring words no one had ever taught him. His mother, a humble young woman named Isadora, would hear from the hammock where she slept. "Everything I touch blossoms. Gold finds me in silence. I am made of abundance." At first, she thought it was a dream. Then she feared she was losing her mind, till one night, with her eyes wide open and heart racing, she clearly saw the baby's little mouth moving, repeating phrases like a quiet spell. The strangest thing was that, despite the poverty they lived in, small miracles began to happen. A neighbor who never spoke smiled for the first time while holding the baby. The dry garden behind their house, where no carrots or herbs had grown in years, began to bloom again. And one morning, Isadora found an old golden coin beneath the baby's crib, as if the ground itself had birthed a gift. The village whispered, both afraid and intrigued. Is it witchcraft? Is it a blessing? Is it a sign? But the baby remained calm. During the day, he slept peacefully. At night, his words filled the house with an invisible glow. Isadora didn't know what to do, but she felt she needed to protect that voice. She began writing each phrase in a blue notebook. "I receive everything with gratitude. The universe works in my favor. Abundance is my natural state." By the end of 3 months, the notebook was full, and so was her life full of change. They never ran out of food. A seamstress from a nearby town asked to sell her lacework. An old man, who had always ignored Isadora, offered firewood from his yard, and the baby kept sleeping and speaking. One night, a traveler knocked at the door. He was a well-dressed man with sharp eyes. "I heard about a child who whispers gold in his sleep," he said. "I want to listen." Isadora hesitated, but something told her the man wasn't there to steal. He came to understand. He sat by the crib, listened, cried, and left in silence. Days later, he sent a letter. "Thank you. Since that night, my company has prospered like never before. I've used your child's words as a prayer. Time passed. The baby grew out at 2 years old. He stopped speaking in his sleep and began repeating the phrases while playing in the bath by 5. He only drew houses with golden windows at 7. He wrote by himself, "Everything works for my good." He never learned that at school. By 10, he was teaching the villagers. He would gather children in a circle and say, "Repeat after me. Life is generous, and so am I." Some laughed. Others cried, and little by little, the village changed. Houses were repaired. Shops thrived. People spoke more softly. Faith, which once was just a Sunday habit, became a seed planted in their routines. It all started with a baby who spoke gold while sleeping, but over time, everyone learned to sleep that way, and those who truly listened woke up different. The man who sold words that made people prospering a village forgotten by time, nestled between quiet valleys and rarely walked trails. There was a man who never carried bags, tools, or jars filled with goods. His trade was far too strange for those who lived off the land, seeds, and sweat. He sold words, ordinary words to those who listened with haste, but extraordinary to those who heard with a still heart. No one knew exactly where he came from, nor where he vanished to for weeks at a time, but whenever he returned, his small blue tent was set up in the center of the square, right beside the old dry well. It was a simple tent, but something inside it was different. Not merchandise, silence, the kind of silence that invites the soul to remember what it has forgotten. The man would sit on a worn wooden bench, and in front of him stood a chalkboard with golden letters, words that prosper. Choose one. That was all. But it was not little. The villagers walked by, suspiciously, half smiling. Words don't fill a belly, they would say. But, curiously, they always came back, because deep down, they knew there was something in that man's presence that reminded them of a time when they believed in the invisible. Those who dared to enter would sit silently before him, and then he would ask, calmly, without making eye contact, "Do you want a word that heals? Or one that transforms?" Most didn't know how to answer. And he would smile. Healing brings relief. Transformation brings destiny. Then he would hand them a small folded piece of paper, handwritten, containing a single word. Sometimes it was worthiness. Other times, expansion. For some, he gave order. For others, acceptance. No one received the same word, and no one received explanations. Only one instruction. Repeat this word every morning, not as someone who waits, but as someone who already has. At first, no one believed it, but over time, strange things began to happen. The village cobbler, who always claimed he never profited, began repeating value every day without fully understanding why. He started charging with more confidence, and the customers kept coming, now with greater respect. An old lady who lived alone after receiving the word union began opening her door to neighbors, and for the first time in years, her house filled with laughter. A shy boy who rarely spoke received the word voice, and though he didn't stop stuttering, he began singing to the birds, and there he found a sound the world had never heard. No one knew if it was magic, suggestion, faith, or coincidence, but everyone felt something shift. The man never explained where the words came from. He only ever said one thing: words are seeds. Some grow in a day, others in a season. But all, if cared for, become trees. Then he would disappear. No warnings. He vanished like wind between the hills. And he'd return when least expected. Some people started collecting the papers. Others preferred to burn the word once they felt it had fulfilled its purpose. An old shepherd once said, "These words aren't just for the mind. They're compasses. They point you to where you should have been going all along." Years passed. The village flourished. Not because they gained money, but because they learned to welcome new ideas. Not because the outer world changed, but because each person began speaking to themselves in a new way. The children were born hearing stories about words that shifted destinies. And the dry well, one day, began to flow again. They say someone had thrown in a paper with the word flow. Others say it wasn't the word, but the intention behind it. The man never claimed praise. He remained seated beneath his blue tin, offering not promises, but possibilities. And to this day, they say that if you find your true word and repeat it with a calm soul, there is no limit to what may unfold. Because, in the end, reality really does begin with what you say to yourself every morning. Before the world wakes up, the boy who listened to money grow while he slept, no one quite understood why that boy went to bed so early. While other children played late into the night, he quietly tucked himself onto his little mattress on the floor, a gentle smile settling over his closed eyes, like someone holding a secret. His name was Ari. His mother often said he was a dreamer, but no one imagined how far his dreams went. What no one knew was that every night, just before drifting off, Ari would put on an old pair of headphones his grandfather had given him. And there, in the darkness of his quiet room, he would listen not to music, not to stories, but to words. Calm phrases repeated softly, like whispers brushing straight against his heart. You were born to prosper. Everything you touch blossoms. Money comes with joy and stays with love. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt them, and what we feel even without understanding shapes who we become. By day, Ari was just an ordinary child. He sold sweets on the corner, helped his mother in the yard, studied with focus, but there was always a different spark in his eyes. He didn't chase coins. He welcomed them with a smile. He believed, with every bit of his soul, that money liked to be around him, that bills recognized him, that opportunities opened not by luck, but by resonance. One day, a neighbor laughed upon seeing Ari whisper to his coins, "That's nonsense. Money doesn't talk." Ari answered gently, "But it listens," and went back to placing his coins into a jar, as if he were nurturing rare seeds. Gradually, without anyone really noticing, things began to change. His candy cart became the most popular. His little stall always had a line. But more than that, he began to inspire other boys to believe, not to compete, but to co-create. Ari never gave lectures. He simply repeated what he heard at night. You deserve everything you desire. Life supports you. Nothing is missing for the one who knows they already have. The other kids began going to bed earlier, too. They borrowed phrases, shared Ari's recordings, and the neighborhood, once filled with complaints, became a place full of ideas. A group of kids started planting flowers to sell. Another raised money to buy used books. And all of them, before sleeping, repeated the same phrases Ari listened to. Slowly, prosperity began to take root, not through magic, but through mindset. Ari grew older. He continued listening to affirmations, but now he recorded his own. In his soft, unhurried voice, he would speak, "Today is the best day of my life. I am a channel of blessings. Everything flows to me with ease." And those words began to spread on flash drives, on old phones, even on local community radios. No one in the neighborhood slept without hearing Ari's voice, but he never sought fame. He only wanted others to feel what he felt when his eyes closed, that the world was good, that anything was possible, that money was an alanat, a ghost. Years later, as a grown man, someone asked Ari what his secret was. He smiled and replied, "While the world shouts, I whisper inward," because he knew the most powerful form of wealth doesn't begin in a bank account, but in the way you speak to yourself before you sleep. And so, even while his body rested, his soul worked in silence, programming a more prosperous tomorrow. Night after night, the girl who played at being grateful before even having anything, she lived in a small house made of wood and hope. The floor creaked with every step, and the roof sometimes whispered with the wind. Yet, inside, there was something that seemed to shine. Not gold, not wealth, but a feeling. A soft presence of something that didn't belong to that reality, but insisted on staying. Her name was Liara. She had no toys, no closet full of clothes, no feast on the table. But she had something different. She played a game that no one had taught her, a game of pretending that life was already filled with everything she desired. Before eating, she would close her eyes, smile, and whisper, "Thank you for the banquet." Even when it was just rice and beans. Before bed, she would hug her pillow and whisper, "Thank you for this giant bed with warm blankets," even though it was a thin mattress. Before leaving the house, she would open the wooden door slowly and say, "Thank you for the garden full of flowers," even if all she saw was dry grass. The neighbors laughed at her imagination. They called her the dreamy girl. But Leora didn't mind, because each time she gave thanks for something that wasn't yet visible, something inside her shifted. Her body relaxed. Her heart beat softer. Her breath became light. She didn't know, but she was teaching herself that the mind doesn't care if something is real or imagined. It responds to the feeling. And gratitude is the key that opens invisible doors. One morning, she woke up with the sound of a bird that she hadn't heard before. It sang in a way that filled the room like sunlight. Leora opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for the music in my house." Her mother smiled with a sigh. "Where do you get all this hope, child?" Leora replied, "I don't know. Maybe I just hear things before they arrive." She spent her days collecting things that didn't exist. She collected laughter she hadn't heard yet, stories she hadn't lived, gifts she hadn't received, and she stored it all inside a museum of invisible treasures that she visited each night before sleep. The village teacher once asked her to draw her dreams. While others drew castles or cars, Leora drew a simple hut with light pouring out, the windows and vines blooming around the door. "This is where I'll live," she said. "But it's your house now." The teacher pointed. "Yes, she said. But when gratitude waters it, everything blooms. The teacher. The man who sold words that made people prospering a village forgotten by time. Nestled between quiet valleys and rarely walked trails, there was a man who never carried bags, tools, or jars filled with goods. His trade was far too strange for those who lived off the land, seeds, and sweat. He sold words. Ordinary words to those who listened with haste, but extraordinary to those who heard with a still heart. No one knew exactly where he came from, nor where he vanished to for weeks at a time, but whenever he returned, his small blue tent was set up in the center of the square, right beside the old dry well. It was a simple tent, but something inside it was different. Not merchandise, silence, the kind of silence that invites the soul to remember what it has forgotten. The man would sit on a worn wooden bench, and in front of him stood a chalkboard with golden letters, words that prosper. Choose one. That was all. But it was not little. The villagers walked by, suspiciously, half smiling. Words don't fill a belly, they would say. But, curiously, they always came back, because deep down, they knew there was something in that man's presence that reminded them of a time when they believed in the invisible. Those who dared to enter would sit silently before him, and then he would ask, calmly, without making eye contact, "Do you want a word that heals? Or one that transforms?" Most didn't know how to answer, and he would smile. Healing brings relief. Transformation brings destiny. Then he would hand them a small folded piece of paper, handwritten, containing a single word. Sometimes it was worthiness. Other times, expansion. For some, he gave order. For others, acceptance. No one received the same word, and no one received explanations. Only one instruction. Repeat this word every morning, not as someone who waits, but as someone who already has. At first, no one believed it, but over time, strange things began to happen. The village cobbler, who always claimed he never profited, began repeating value every day, without fully understanding why. He started charging with more confidence, and the customers kept coming, now with greater respect. An old lady who lived alone after receiving the word union began opening her door to neighbors, and for the first time in years, her house filled with laughter. A shy boy who rarely spoke received the word voice, and though he didn't stop stuttering, he began singing to the birds, and there he found a sound the world had never heard. No one knew if it was magic, suggestion, faith, or coincidence. But everyone felt something shift. The man never explained where the words came from. He only ever said one thing: words are seeds. Some grow in a day, others in a season. But all, if cared for, become trees. Then he would disappear. No warnings. He vanished like wind between the hills, and he'd return when least expected. Some people started collecting the papers. Others preferred to burn the word once they felt it had fulfilled its purpose. An old shepherd once said, "These words aren't just for the mind. They're compasses. They point you to where you should have been going all along." Years passed. The village flourished. Not because they gained money, but because they learned to welcome new ideas. Not because the outer world changed, but because each person began speaking to themselves in a new way. The children were born hearing stories about words that shifted destinies. And the dry well, one day, began to flow again. They say someone had thrown in a paper with the word flow. Others say it wasn't the word, but the intention behind it. The man never claimed praise. He remained seated beneath his blue tent, offering not promises, but possibilities. And to this day, they say that if you find your true word and repeat it with a calm soul, there is no limit to what may unfold. Because, in the end, reality really does begin with what you say to yourself every morning. Before the world wakes up, the boy who listened to money grow while he slept, no one quite understood why that boy went to bed so early. While other children played late into the night, he quietly tucked himself onto his little mattress on the floor, a gentle smile settling over his closed eyes, like someone holding a secret. His name was Ari. His mother often said he was a dreamer, but no one imagined how far his dreams went. What no one knew was that every night, just before drifting off, Ari would put on an old pair of headphones his grandfather had given him, and there, in the darkness of his quiet room, he would listen not to music, not to stories, but to words, calm phrases repeated softly, like whispers brushing straight against his heart. You were born to prosper. Everything you touch blossoms. Money comes with joy and stays with love. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt them. And what we feel even without understanding shapes who we become. By day, Ari was just an ordinary child. He sold sweets on the corner, helped his mother in the yard, studied with focus. But there was always a different spark in his eyes. He didn't chase coins. He welcomed them with a smile. He believed, with every bit of his soul, that money liked to be around him, that bills recognized him, that opportunities opened not by luck, but by resonance. One day, a neighbor laughed upon seeing Ari whisper to his coins, "That's nonsense. Money doesn't talk." Ari answered gently, "But it listens," and went back to placing his coins into a jar, as if he were nurturing rare seeds. Gradually, without anyone really noticing, things began to change. His candy cart became the most popular. His little stall always had a line. But more than that, he began to inspire other boys to believe, not to compete, but to co-create. Ari never gave lectures. He simply repeated what he heard at night. You deserve everything you desire. Life supports you. Nothing is missing for the one who knows they already have. The other kids began going to bed earlier, too. They borrowed phrases, shared Ari's recordings, and the neighborhood, once filled with complaints, became a place full of ideas. A group of kids started planting flowers to sell. Another raised money to buy used books. And all of them, before sleeping, repeated the same phrases Ari listened to. Slowly, prosperity began to take root not through magic, but through mindset. Ari grew older. He continued listening to affirmations, but now he recorded his own. In his soft, unhurried voice, he would speak, "Today is the best day of my life. I am a channel of blessings. Everything flows to me with ease." And those words began to spread on flash drives, on old phones, even on local community radios. No one in the neighborhood slept without hearing Ari's voice, but he never sought fame. He only wanted others to feel what he felt when his eyes closed, that the world was good, that anything was possible, that money was an Alanat, a ghost. Years later, as a grown man, someone asked Ari what his secret was. He smiled and replied, "While the world shouts, I whisper inward," because he knew the most powerful form of wealth doesn't begin in a bank account, but in the way you speak to yourself before you sleep. And so, even while his body rested, his soul worked in silence, programming a more prosperous tomorrow. Night after night, the girl who played at being grateful before even having anything, she lived in a small house made of wood and hope. The floor creaked with every step, and the roof sometimes whispered with the wind. Yet, inside, there was something that seemed to shine. Not gold, not wealth, but a feeling. A soft presence of something that didn't belong to that reality, but insisted on staying. Her name was Liara. She had no toys, no closet full of clothes, no feast on the table. But she had something different. She played a game that no one had taught her. A game of pretending that life was already filled with everything she desired. Before eating, she would close her eyes, smile, and whisper, "Thank you for the banquet." Even when it was just rice and beans. Before bed, she would hug her pillow and whisper, "Thank you for this giant bed with warm blankets," even though it was a thin mattress. Before leaving the house, she would open the wooden door slowly and say, "Thank you for the garden full of flowers," even if all she saw was dry grass. The neighbors laughed at her imagination. They called her the dreamy girl. But Leora didn't mind, because each time she gave thanks for something that wasn't yet visible, something inside her shifted. Her body relaxed. Her heart beat softer. Her breath became light. She didn't know, but she was teaching herself that the mind doesn't care if something is real or imagined. It responds to the feeling. And gratitude is the key that opens invisible doors. One morning, she woke up with the sound of a bird that she hadn't heard before. It sang in a way that filled the room like sunlight. Leora opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you for the music in my house." Her mother smiled with a sigh. "Where do you get all this hope, child?" Leora replied, "I don't know. Maybe I just hear things before they arrive." She spent her days collecting things that didn't exist. She collected laughter she hadn't heard yet, stories she hadn't lived, gifts she hadn't received, and she stored it all inside a museum of invisible treasures that she visited each night before sleep. The village teacher once asked her to draw her dreams. While others drew castles or cars, Leora drew a simple hut with light pouring out, the windows and vines blooming around the door. "This is where I'll live," she said. "But it's your house now," the teacher pointed. "Yes," she said. "But when gratitude waters it, everything blooms." The teacher